The last thing anyone heard before the final storm was a heavy, strange quiet. Men stood on the prison yard and listened. The sun was high. The day felt ordinary. Then, without warning, soldiers and officers swarmed the gates. They came in trucks. They came with shields and strong boots. They came with guns and with orders. The air smelled like dust and metal. A bright light from helicopters cut the sky. Voices shouted. Men on the walls shouted. Someone blew a loud horn. Then the prisoners who had taken control of Attica felt the world crash into them. When the retake began, it was fast and fierce. Officers moved through the cell blocks. Men pushed and fell. Doors were smashed open. Men ran to find cover. Smoke filled the halls from tear gas canisters. The noise was huge: shouts, banging, alarms, the click of boots. Some people were hurt badly. Some would not wake up again. Others were grabbed and led away, scared and coughing. By the time the day ended, 43 people were dead. That number is heavy. It still causes people to ask hard questions. Many asked, did we have to use so much force? Were we careful enough? Was there another way? That was the most shocking part of the Attica story. It is the part people remember most. It is the part that still makes people argue today. But to understand how this violent day happened, we must go back to the start. We must see how things built up slowly, step by step, until a whole prison rose up and then fell in a single terrible day. It began long before the men took the yard. Attica Correctional Facility sat in a flat field in western New York. It held many men from many places. Some were young. Some were old. Some had been there a short time. Others had been there for years. They worked in factories, in the laundry, in the kitchen. They walked the same halls every day. The food was plain. The beds were thin. The rooms were crowded. To the men inside, Attica felt small and loud. Doors clanged. Lights buzzed. Guards walked by with keys on their belts and looked at faces like numbers. The men did not see strong chances to speak up. They had complaints. Many wanted fair medical care. They wanted clean water and warm clothes. They wanted fair rules and fair hearing. They also wanted protection from guards who sometimes used power badly. Many men had stories of being hit or yelled at when they did not deserve it. They had asked for change. They had asked many times. Outside, people spoke of crime and punishment. Many trusted prisons to keep communities safe. Many thought prisons should be strict. But inside, the men felt alone. Even when they wrote letters, they were ignored or treated like troublemakers. Small events kept piling up. A guard might take a radio away and walk off. A food truck might be late and the men go hungry. A doctor might not come for a sick prisoner. A man might be moved to another block for no clear reason. Each small wrong made anger grow. In the months before the uprising, men in Attica began to talk more with each other. They met quietly in corners and on the roof. Some men who had once not cared about groups began to listen. They learned each other's stories. They shared small hopes. They listened to one another's pain. From those talks, a plan grew. They would ask for change. They would make a list of demands. They wanted better food, clean clothes, fair rules, and safe treatment. They also wanted to control who did what inside the prison blocks. They wanted to be treated like human beings. On the morning the uprising began, there was a fight in one of the blocks. It was small at first. But things moved fast. A guard pushed a man too hard. A man shoved back. Soon, more men were in the hall. Someone shouted the word riot. Other blocks heard. Men came out into the yard. They locked the outer gates from the inside. They walked through the day rooms. A young man stood on a table and told everyone they needed to talk. He had a loud voice and words that sounded true. Men listened. By noon, a lot of men were standing on the yard. They had taken control of some of the cell blocks. They wanted to keep violence low. They tried to hold order. They drew up a list of demands on paper. They wanted lawyers. They wanted the press. They wanted visitors. They wanted the right to speak to officials. They wanted 28 specific changes in how they lived and were treated. They said they would not let guards into the blocks until officials promised to listen. They would not let the men outside their space go in. They wanted to make sure no one would be badly punished if they talked. When officials outside the fence heard about the takeover, many were afraid. Some thought the men were dangerous and needed to be crushed quickly. Others thought the men would talk if the state sent negotiators. Newspapers and TV picked up the story. People outside had very different ideas about what should happen. Some families of prisoners begged for a peaceful solution. Some politicians said the state must act tough. In the first hours, negotiators did come. Lawyers and civil rights leaders were called. They entered the yard and sat with men on the ground. They listened to the list of demands. Some promises were made. Promises are easy to make. It is harder to keep them. The talks went on for days. Men on the inside waited for the state to send people who would listen and make real changes. The men wanted cameras and legal help so they could show the world what life was like in Attica. As the days passed, the atmosphere grew tense. Food lines were long. Some men were hurt by disease. Nurses tried to help but had little supplies. The men inside wanted to make sure the people outside couldn't simply ignore them. They wanted to make news. They wanted lawyers to see them as men, not numbers. They wanted their dignity back. Outside the prison, the state's leaders worried. They feared losing control. They feared a bigger riot. The governor and his advisors debated. Some talked about bringing in the National Guard. Others wanted to send in more police. They argued about whether to keep talking to the prisoners who had the yard, or to use force. There was no easy answer. The men inside the yard were not all the same. Some wanted to keep the peace. Some wanted revenge. Some saw an hour of power and did not want to give it up. Days passed into nights. Negotiations were slow. People were tired. Emotions cooled and then flared again. At some point, some of the men inside were taken to speak with officials and then brought back with promises that did not come true. The slow pace disheartened many on the yard. It made them angrier. They began to fear they had been tricked. Those fears turned into threats. The mood changed from hopeful to weary. A few of the leaders on the inside warned, "Don't trust empty words." Others said, "Keep waiting." The men were split. Meanwhile, families and friends outside painted pictures on news shows of prisoners with faces and names. They said, "These are sons, fathers, brothers." They begged for peaceful talks. Some lawyers tried to put cameras in the yard so that the world could see the talks. The state refused on grounds of security. The lawyers said that seeing would make the world understand the men's demands. The governor and many officials thought allowing cameras might encourage lawlessness. The two sides could not agree. Then came the fateful decision. Leaders decided to retake the prison by force. They said the only way to restore order was to send in state police, correction officers, and units with shields and guns. They brought in teams trained to handle tough riots. They planned a night attack so the men on the yard would be surprised and not able to arm themselves. They told each other the plan was precise and would be quick. On the morning the attack began, the men on the yard were still talking. Some were sleeping in tarps. Others sat in small circles. Some were making lists of who would be safe. Nobody knew exactly when the retake would come. Many believed the state would keep talking. Then the trucks came. Helicopters buzzed. Men with masks and heavy gear climbed out. Bright lights blinded the yard. The state said it sent tear gas to stop violence and to force men out of the cell blocks. Officers fired hundreds of rounds of ammunition. The noise covered the cries and shouts. The fighting was fierce and short. The smoke was heavy. Many could not breathe. Some hid in corners. Some came out with their hands up and were taken away. When the fighting ended, the yard was quiet in a new way. Men were on stretchers. The injured were carried out. Many were afraid. Many families would later learn that their sons would not come home. The toll was terrible. 43 people lost their lives, some men who had been prisoners and some officers who had gone in to retake the prison. The retake raised hard, painful questions. Were the orders given too quickly? Was the level of force used too high? Could more have been done with patient talks? Could the state have kept the promises it made during negotiations? These questions sparked protests and court cases. Families asked for answers. The federal government later opened investigations. Some people said the men were treated badly during and after the retake. Some people said the state had no choice. The truth, like many truths, had pieces that looked different depending on who told the story. That day, Attica changed America's view of prisons. The story spread across the country. People saw video and read reports. Some marched in the streets. Some demanded better medical care in prisons. Some demanded more prison oversight. Others called for tougher punishment and more power for prison officials. Many wanted to know what became of the promises made that were not kept. The cut between what could have been and what happened is a long one. The men who survived told their stories. Families fought for truth. Lawyers sued the state. The memory of Attica kept others watching prisons more closely. For some, Attica became a warning. For others, it was a sign to stand up for fair treatment of all humans, no matter what they had done. At the end of that first chapter of the story, the yard is cleared. The men are taken. The smoke lifts. The cameras slow down. But the question stays, could the leaders outside and inside have done things differently? Might talks have worked if the state had stayed patient and kept promises? Or had the moment already passed, making the retake inevitable? The answers are not simple. The next chapter will continue from here and look deeper at what happened during the retake, how the wounded were treated afterward, and what the long fight for justice looked like in the years that followed.